Okay.
So the difference between Java Development Kit and Java Enterprise Edition is, in the Java Development Kit Standard Edition, we have classes, we have compilation libraries available only to make desktop based applications. Okay.
Okay.
While when we talk about Java Enterprise Edition, so it contains compilation libraries to compile programs for web also. It includes for desktop as well as for web. Okay, which means you can create websites using Java programming language with the Enterprise Edition. So that is the difference.
Okay.
And the development kit is required in order to compile your programs so that you can convert them into classes or into binaries so that they can run on Java runtime environment. Okay.
Okay.
Now let's get to the exception handling part. Now what we are going to do, we're going to explore the exception handlings. So in order to refer the exception handlings, there are a lot of great resources available. We'll always try to make use of the standard resources available from Oracle documentation itself. Okay. Else we can see other exception handling content also from various, from various resources. So you can see that
Yes.
we can quickly get into the definition of exception handling, the original resource from Oracle website itself, and you can see a few from let's say W3 schools, and you can get exception handlings with different practices which we can use. What is the best way to use exception handling? We can refer some more articles also. Okay, so I'll take
Okay.
you to a few of the articles and we'll see what is the difference. Okay. Now, there are hundreds of articles with respect to different standard edition, with respect to MVC, but we'll get it going. We'll see what all needs to be done. Okay. So let us get started with the formal definition of what is exception handling, followed by we're going to understand how we implement uh, exception handling and what will be the best practices to handle the exceptions. Okay. So now the
Okay.
official definition of exception handling says, in computing and computer programming, exception handling is the process of responding to the occurrence of exceptions. Okay. Exceptions could be anomalous or exceptional conditions requiring special processing. So during the execution of the program, which means, let's say you are, let's say you have written a program which takes a string input. Okay. Now,
Yes.
instead of string, suppose you give a number. Now, once you took the input, you are going to process the input. So suppose you have written a function where you are processing the string, but eventually you are giving an integer. So this will land you into a format exception. Okay. Now, format exception means that you are actually asking for string and you are processing it like a string, but the actual input given by the user is an integer, which will definitely make it fall into an exceptional case. Okay. So in that
Yes.
case, how we are going to uh, protect our program from abruptly being terminated. Okay. So that is something
Okay.
is the exception handling part. Okay. So what it does in general, an exception breaks the normal flow of execution and executes a pre-registered exception handler. Okay. So we are going to see how the exceptions work. There's a lot when it comes to exceptions. Earlier, there were hardware exceptions handling. Now we have the software exception handling. So we are going to see how do we handle the exceptions and what kind of exception handling techniques are available in Java Standard Edition. So I'm going to share the resource from Oracle itself on your card.
Okay.
Java exception handling. Okay, this is going to be the resource which we are going to refer, the standard one from Oracle. Now, what are the exceptions? So we'll go with a few definitions. So it says Java programming language use exceptions to handle errors and other exceptional events. What is an exception? An exception is an event that occurs during the execution of a program that disrupts the normal flow of instructions. Okay, got it?
Yes.
Now, how do we catch the exception, or how do we specify the requirement to handle that exception? So we are going to get into this section and we'll understand how can we catch and handle the exceptions, and we can handle the exceptions using the keywords known as try, catch, and finally blocks. Okay, this is the way
Yes.
we handle the exceptions. Apart from handling the exceptions, we can throw the exceptions also. Okay, throw the sections as in we can generate the exceptions on different conditions. So there is a throw statement also which we do need to understand through the throwable class, so that we can throw the exceptions whenever we want to disrupt the execution of the program, depending on users behavior. Okay, similarly,
Okay.
we have various resources with private resources statement, which we will check. There are certain unchecked exceptions. We will get understanding of that and the advantages of exceptions. So these are the overall requirement of how we are going to handle the exceptions. Okay, let's get into the definition. The definition is quite cool here. The documentation is very nice on Oracle. So it says the term exception is the shorthand for the phrase known as exceptional event. Definition is an exception is an event which occurs during the execution of the program that disrupts the normal flow of the program's instructions. So that is the formal definition of what an exception is. Similarly, what really happens? So when an error occurs within a method, the method creates an object and hands it off to the runtime system. The object called an exception object contains information about the error, including its type and the state of the program when the error occurred. And by creating an exception object and handling it to the runtime system is called throwing an exception. Okay. So whenever a method throws an exception, the runtime system attempts to find something to handle it. Okay. So the set of possible something to handle the exception is the ordered list of methods that had been called to get to the method where the error occurred. And the list of methods
Okay.
is known as the call stack. Okay. You would have seen whenever an error occurs, we get to have a backtrace or a stack trace, which lets us understand where the exception hand occurred. Okay. So
Yes.
we're going to understand it. We'll see that. So here is an example call stack. You can see. So it will show us that you call the main function, then main function has called another method, then another method, and finally it will show the method where the error occurred. Okay. So we are going to process it accordingly. Let us just keep it on one side, and on the other side, we are going to test it with Eclipse. Okay. So I'm going to start my Eclipse. I'm going to start my standard workspace. Okay. So we are going to create a new Java project. Let us call it as exception handling. Okay. So I'm using Java Standard
Okay.
Edition 1.7, and I'm going to click on finish. So we've got a new project, exception handling. And within this, we're going to get started with the exception handling part. Okay, so I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to call this class as the exception test. Okay, it's going to be a public class. I want to keep it in the default package. I will get the method stub public static void main by default. Okay, and finish. Now you can see that I've got a standard stub. Okay, So now we are going to get started with the exception test. Okay. And what am I going to
Okay.
do is we're going to understand something like a call stack. We'll see how the call stack is working. Okay. Now, so suppose I'm writing a program here. I'll give you some sample test. Okay. Let's do some basic mathematical calculations.
Okay.
So suppose uh, what I want to do is I want to calculate the maximum heartbeat of a user, let's say maximum heartbeat of a user. Okay. So what should be a maximum heart rate of a user? So suppose we say the standard formula is 220 minus age of the person. Okay. This will give you
Okay.
the maximum heart rate of a user. Okay. Of a patient, let's say, or of any user. Now, so what we can do,
Yes.
let's say we are going to define a value, let's say age. Okay. Suppose I'm 31 years of age. Okay. So I'm going to define, let's say my integer age is equal to 31. Okay. So what should be my maximum heart rate? So I'm going to define my max heart rate. Max heart rate should be 220 minus my age. Is it? That should be the standard rate. And finally, I'm going to print out this. Let's say system.out.println. And I'm going to say max heart rate is, and I'm going to concatenate my max heart rate, let's say.
Okay.
Okay, fine. And let me just, I think the size of the, is it visible to you?
Yes.
Okay. So we got this. So what we did, we took an age, we took a maximum heart rate example, and we got, let's say, what are we going to print? Okay, we are going to print the maximum heart rate. So when I execute this program in the normal conditions, okay, I'm going to get it executed properly, and it gives me that maximum heart rate is 189 because I've got an integer value and I've got an integer calculation formula, and I got my maximum heart rate is 189. So this is the regular way of function execution. Okay. Now suppose what I said, instead of proper number, by mistake, let's say I have given something like, I have given something like a string here in the age. Let's say I've given a string here. Okay. And if I run
Yes.
that, you will be able to see naturally the program execution is going to be, it's going to fail because we are not giving the proper format of the code. So once I test it, now what it says, error exists in the project, exception handling, proceed with the launch. For now, I'm going to proceed because I just want the exception to be raised. So once I do that, now you can see that I've got a call stack which says exception in the thread main, an error has been handling it. It says unresolved compilation problem. The operator is undefined for the argument type integer and string. Okay. And if I go to the stack trace, it will take me to the line where I'm getting that issue. Can you see that?
Yes.
Now, similarly, what I can do is we can do it in another way also. Let's say I took an integer age. Okay. And this integer age could be something from system.input. Okay. And this could be something like, let's say, okay, what else we can do? Let's say we can, I think you got it, right? The simple one, the simple example. So now what we are
Yep.
getting, we are getting a call stack, okay? And we are getting the exceptions handled in case if there is a situation where an error started occurring due to bad inputs or anything like that. Okay. Now
Okay.
what next we have? So the runtime system searches the call stack for a method that contains a block of code that can handle the exception. This block of code is called an exception handler. The search begins with the method in which the error occurred and proceeds through the call stack in the reverse order in which the methods were called. When an appropriate handler is found, the runtime system passes the exception to the handler. An exception handler is considered appropriate if the type of the exception thrown matches the type that can be handled by that handler. Okay, which means we can define the type of exception which needs to be handled by our exception handling block, as well as we do have some standard exceptional handling classes which can handle any kind of exception. So we are going to see in both the ways how we are going to use it. Okay.
Okay.
Now, so this is your first standard example of basic exception test when we have got the heart rate system done. Now, within this, what are we going to do? We can quickly get into handling the exceptions in such a way where we can take in the input. Okay. So, I think you already explored the concepts of having the system inputs. I'm going to take up one example. Okay. So I've got the few articles and I'm going to run it and I'm going to show you for the system input, system.in Java reference. Okay. Whenever you do need to use any of these functions, you can use the standard Java references, which will give you proper documentation about how to use the specific, the classes. Here is the scanner class. So what do we have is we do have a scanner in Java, wherein the main class is system, which does have an input stream. Okay. So what are we going to do? We're going to use the standard input stream in order to read the values, okay, which we can quickly give in the real time. Okay. Is that clear? There
Okay.
are a lot of methods which we might be using in future. And I'll give you one simple example of how the system.in works. So what we did, we create a new scanner class, which will read the values or scan the values from the input stream. Okay. And we can read the values by calling next line or next integer. Okay. And then we can perform certain operations. So this is what we are going to implement in our code now. So I'm getting back to the exceptional handling section. Let me just keep it over here. And what am I going to do now is, let's say instead of taking the values in a hard-coded format, now let's say we are going to take it from a user. Okay. So what I'll say, I'm going to
Okay.
make the program in certain ways. Let's say we'll start the program system.out.println. Let's say we're going to say welcome to max heart rate calculator. Okay. In the second way, we are going to ask for a new scanner. Let's say I'm going to create an object, new scanner. I'm going to use system.input.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to create a new object. Let's say scanner sc is equal to new scanner. Okay. We
Okay.
would be needing to import the scanner also.
Yes.
Let's get to here. So you can import the scanner class. Okay. So to import the scanner, we have to import java.util.scanner so that the scanner is accessible. Now, what are we going to do? Let's say we're going to take in the user here, let's say sc dot next integer. Okay. So we got an integer and now we are going to get that calculation done. Okay. So what we can do is we can also write one system.out.println and we'll say, please enter your age.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to run. Now, once I run, it says, please enter your age. So I will say my age is 31. So I've got my max rate calculation as 189. Similarly,
Yes.
let's say how old you are,
21.
21. So we'll say your max heart rate should be 199. So we got this program running properly. But now, instead of the integer, if I give something like, uh, what is your age? My age is 31. Okay. I said it like that because I don't know.
Yep.
I do need to enter integer or whatever. So mistakenly, what the user did, it did entered 31 in English. Okay. And once he
Yes.
entered, and we landed up into an exception now. Okay. Now, what is the exception? So this is the exception stack, the call stack. You can see the call stack here on the left hand side. This is what is the call stack is. We call it as a call stack. Okay. Now, what
Okay.
it is showing the call stack in the same format that it will give you in a reverse order. Okay. The method where the error occurred, then method without an exception handler, method with an exception handler, and finally the main method from where the execution started. So this is the main method exception test. Okay. Then this is somewhere the next integer on 2218, it has been handled. Okay. This is from the scanner class itself. Their exception throw has been defined under scanner.java on line number 39 that they have to throw an input mismatch exception. Okay. So this is the exception.
Yes.
Call this exception as the input mismatch exception. Okay. Now, so what
Okay.
are we going to do? We need to handle this exception. So you are clear with the with what the call stack is. Okay. So what exactly is happening in the exceptional handling part? We got a main method. There is a class which catches the exception. It forwards the exceptions and it throws the exceptions. Okay. So this is what something is happening on the right hand side in the exceptional block. Is that clear?
Yes.
Now, now we are going to understand in the next concept, which means how are we going to catch it? Okay. So now, in order to catch these exceptions, what are we going to do? So valid Java programming language code must honor the catch or the specify requirement. This means that code that might throw certain exceptions must be enclosed by either of the following. So either you need to have a try statement that catches the exception. The try must provide a handler for the exception as described in catching and handling exceptions, and we'll work out on it. Okay. Followed by
Okay.
a method that specifies that it can throw the exception. The method must provide a throws clause that lists the exception as described in specifying in exceptions thrown by a method. So we will work out on it also. Okay. Now it says there are three kinds of exceptions. Okay. So the first kind of exception is the checked exception. These are exception conditions that a well-written application should anticipate and recover from. The example, suppose an application prompts a user for an input file name, then opens the file by passing the name to the constructor file reader. Normally, the user provides the name of an existing readable file, so the construction of the file reader object succeeds and the execution of the application proceeds normally. But sometimes the user supplies the name of a non-existent file and the constructor throws a file not found exception. So a well-written program will catch this exception and notify the user of the mistake, possibly prompting for a corrected file name. Okay. So in the same way, we are going to use the checked exception. The concept we are currently implementing is the checked exception. Second kind of exception is the
Okay.
error. And the third kind of exception is the runtime exception. Okay. During running, if you have not supplied a value and simply entered, so it gives you the null pointer exception. Okay. And in case if
Okay.
there is an error, so it gives you a Java input output error kind of exception. So there are three kinds of exceptions. Okay. So checked, error, and the third one is your runtime exceptions. Okay. So now, similarly, if I quickly run this again, So current exception which you are seeing here is a checked exception. Okay. But if I run again, and if I just press enter, okay, I'm going to get the format exception here. Okay, not an issue. So what we'll do, let us just quickly solve this out. So how are we going to handle the exception? Now what is currently happening, input mismatch information is happening. So what do we need to do? We need to specify that to the user that you need to enter the values in an integer format. Okay. So
Okay.
what are we going to do? Let us just protect it now. So we are going to write a try block on whichever line I want it to be, I want to handle. Okay. As well as you can see on which line the test, on which line the error is happening. So the error is happening on this line, system.out.println and sc.next integer, and then calculation of the age. So what I'll do, I'm going to write this complete block in a try catch. Okay. So I've started the try block. This becomes my try block. So try block is going to know that an exception occurred. Okay. And then what we can do, we can define a catch. Okay. And catch is the handler that in case if the exception happened, then what's going to be done. So I'm going to handle an exception known as input mismatch exception. Okay. I'm going to call it as E, input mismatch exception. And I'm going to import input mismatch exception from java.utility. Okay. So you can see that we've also imported the input mismatch exception from Java util. Okay. So now once we get to see this, we're going to specify to the user, please enter integer. Okay. Please enter integer. Got it? So now this time the program is handled properly. So once I click on run this time, so I've got an age. If I put something else, it says, please enter integer only. Okay. Instead of abruptly terminating my program. Okay. So if I will run the age appropriately, if I say 30, it will give me the max heart rate. But in case if I'm not handling it properly, if I'm giving some unwanted data, it will say that you have to enter integer only in the program. Okay. So this is one example of handling exceptions through the try and catch way. But there are various other, ways with which we will be handling it. You can use throws, then we'll be using finally. So we'll get into that concept. Okay. So if you have time, what I need you to do is you got to see the sample idea about how the exception handling will be done. So you need to go through with the further concepts also, have a read about it. And in the next class, we'll quickly cover the other parts of the exceptions. Okay.
Okay.
You got it right?
Yes.
Cool. So what am I going to do? I'm going to upload the code on GitHub also, and I'm going to share the repo with you. Also, the video I'll be uploading shortly so that you will have access to it and you can revise through it.